The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows of Pemberton Bistro, casting long shadows across the polished floor. This upscale restaurant, one of Portland's most renowned dining spots, buzzed with hushed conversations, the rhythmic clinking of glasses, and the soft melodies drifting from the grand piano in the corner. None of the diners paid much attention when the front door swung open, revealing the silhouette of an older woman stepping inside. Mary moved slowly, but with purpose. Her back remained straight, her shoulders unbowed despite the years that had left their mark on her body. She wore a deep navy blue coat adorned with intricate embroidery along the sleeves, exuding an understated elegance. A small black handbag was tucked securely beneath her arm, and her steps were steady, unwavering. Yet, even with that quiet confidence, she could feel the glances brushing over her, brief looks, a few hushed murmurs. The hostess greeted her with a polite smile, though not one of genuine warmth. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" she asked, her tone slightly stiff. Her eyes flicked over the reservation list, almost as if she hoped not to find Mary's name. "Yes, under Mary," the older woman responded, her voice gentle but firm. The hostess checked, nodded, and led her toward a small table tucked near the kitchen. It wasn't the best seat in the house, but Mary didn't complain. She simply offered a faint smile and quietly placed her bag on the table. She was used to this, and tonight she would simply observe. Pemberton Bistro prided itself on being an upscale restaurant, a place where guests came to indulge in refined dining and sophisticated conversation. But for people like Mary, this was more than just a dining establishment. It was a test, a reflection of how people perceived and treated one another. As she settled into her seat, the restaurant continued to hum with life. Guests chatted animatedly, the clinking of glasses harmonized with soft laughter, and the evening carried on as usual. Yet, there was a subtle difference in how the world moved around her. Though she had been seated for some time, no one approached to check on her. Servers drifted past, tending to other tables with seamless attentiveness, as if she weren't even there. She observed, saying nothing. This wasn't the first time she had experienced this. It was never loud, never blatant, yet always present. A deliberate indifference, a carefully disguised neglect wrapped in the illusion of busyness. When a young server named Amos passed her table for the third time, without so much as a glance, she knew this wasn't just an oversight. Her eyes flicked around the room. At the table beside her, a young couple who had arrived after she did had already been greeted, given menus, and served water. Another guest had just ordered a glass of wine and received it within minutes. Meanwhile, Mary remained seated, hands resting lightly on the table. No water, no greeting, nothing. A few wandering gazes began to notice. Some guests were starting to sense the discrepancy, but Mary remained silent, waiting to see just how far this would go. No one in the restaurant knew that Mary was more than just an ordinary guest. On the surface, she appeared to be just an elderly woman, sitting quietly in a corner, waiting for a service that no one seemed in a hurry to provide. But in reality, she was not alone. Across the restaurant, someone was watching every move unfold. Yike, the owner of Pemberton Bistro, sat silently at a table near the bar. He hadn't needed to be here tonight, but something in the air had made him stay. When he saw his mother walk in, he chose to observe rather than intervene right away. He wanted to see whether his staff, the people he had entrusted with upholding the restaurant's standards, truly treated all customers with fairness and respect. The answer came sooner than he expected. He watched as Amos, the young server, walked past his mother's table multiple times without stopping. He saw how Amos chatted and laughed with other customers, while Mary sat there, ignored, as if she didn't exist. He noticed his mother's patience, but he also saw the way other diners had begun glancing toward her table. A few had started to recognize the discrepancy, yet no one spoke up. A slow burn of anger rose in Yike's chest. This was his restaurant, the place he had built with his own hands and hard work, a place where respect was meant to be fundamental. And yet, in this very moment, the woman who had taught him about patience and dignity was being treated as if she wasn't even worthy of acknowledgement. He tightened his grip around his glass of water, knowing the moment to step in was approaching. But first, he wanted to see just how far this would go. Mary sat still at her table, her hands resting lightly on the polished wooden surface. She didn't fidget, nor did she glance around impatiently as other diners might in the same situation. But her silence was not one of acceptance, it was one of deliberate observation. From across the room, Yike continued watching, his sharp eyes absorbing every detail. He saw how Amos, the young server, repeatedly walked past his mother's table without stopping. He noticed how guests who had arrived after her were promptly greeted, their glasses filled, their orders taken with effortless warmth. Meanwhile, his mother remained there, deliberately ignored. Then, a conversation changed everything. While wiping down the bar, a staff member murmured to a co-worker about a recent team meeting regarding service standards. One of them scoffed. "Honestly, some customers just don't fit the atmosphere here. If we slow things down a bit, they'll figure out they don't belong." The other chuckled in agreement. Yike heard every word, and his blood boiled. His mother didn't need protection. She had faced situations like this her entire life and knew how to carry herself with dignity. But that didn't mean she should have to endure it. He glanced at her, watching as she lifted her empty water glass, only to realize it was still dry. That was the moment he knew. Waiting was no longer an option, because this time the person being dismissed wasn't just anyone. It was his mother, and Yike would not let it continue. Yike knew that handling this situation required patience, not haste. The anger burned within him, but he had learned from his mother that patience was often the most powerful weapon. He needed to fully grasp the situation, to witness the truth before making his move. He watched more closely. Amos continued to pass by his mother's table without a single sign of acknowledgement. Other guests were met with warm smiles, friendly inquiries about their day, effortless hospitality. But Mary remained invisible to him. Yet it wasn't just Amos. Something more subtle was unfolding. A few other staff members exchanged quick glances toward his mother, unreadable but unmistakable, as if silently agreeing that she didn't belong here. Mary said nothing, but Yike knew she was taking in every detail. She wasn't easily shaken by acts of disrespect, but that didn't mean she should have to endure them. More importantly, this was his restaurant. If this could happen to his own mother, then it could happen to anyone. Yike knew he couldn't change everything alone. He needed proof. He needed others to see what was happening. His gaze shifted toward his manager, Dana, and with a subtle nod, he signaled her. She understood instantly. Dana stepped forward, quietly observing Amos without a word. She saw how he turned away when Yike's mother motioned for service. She saw how he pretended not to hear, and she knew that when the moment of reckoning came, Amos would have no excuse. Yike tightened his grip around his glass of water. The plan was coming together, and Amos had no idea that his time at this restaurant was about to run out. That day, Yike knew the time to act had come. He was no longer just observing. He was preparing to confront the issue head-on. Amos had no idea that every action, every dismissive glance, every subtle sign of disrespect had been noted. Mary remained seated, patient yet unwavering. She wasn't seeking attention, nor was she demanding anything beyond the respect she was owed. Just like any other guest, But Amos's lack of professionalism wasn't mere negligence. It was a choice, a deliberate decision to ignore someone he assumed had no power, no voice to push back. But Amos was wrong. From behind the bar, Yike gave a subtle nod to Dana, the restaurant's manager. She understood immediately. Without hesitation, she made her way to Yike's mother, gracefully refilling her water glass and placing a menu in front of her. The contrast between her attentive service and Amos's blatant disregard was impossible to ignore. It only took seconds for the rest of the diners to notice. Eyes shifted toward Mary, toward Amos, toward Yike. A tense silence settled over the room as Dana, her voice calm but firm, said, "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for the delay. I will personally be serving you tonight." Nearby, Amos stiffened. He said nothing, but the realization was clear on his face. He knew what was coming. Yike took a deep breath, bracing himself for the moment that would change everything. This time, disrespect would not go unchecked, and Amos would have to face the consequences. Amos felt the shift in the atmosphere the moment Dana stepped in. She didn't say much, just quietly placed the menu in front of Mary, filled her glass, and offered a sincere apology. But that simple act made the contrast in service glaringly obvious, an undeniable difference. The surrounding diners began to take notice, exchanging puzzled glances as they pieced together what was happening. Yike rose from his seat, walking toward Amos with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't need to raise his voice or display his anger. His presence alone was enough to make Amos uneasy. As Yike approached, Amos suddenly realized the owner of the restaurant was now looking directly at him. "Can you explain why my mother has been sitting here for over 30 minutes without being served?" Yike's voice was low but sharp, each word carrying weight. Amos swallowed hard, his gaze darting away. I didn't mean to. We've just been really busy tonight." "Really?" Yike cut in, his tone still calm but laced with unmistakable coldness. "Then why were the tables that arrived after her served drinks immediately? Why did you walk past her so many times without once asking if she needed anything?" Silence fell over the restaurant. All eyes were now on Amos. The murmurs had ceased. Amos opened his mouth to respond, but there was no excuse that could justify what had happened. He knew he had been caught, not just by Yike, but by everyone in the room. Yike held his gaze firmly. "I don't tolerate this kind of service in my restaurant," he said slowly, "and I certainly won't allow it to happen to my mother." Amos stood frozen, knowing this moment would determine his future, and Yike's message couldn't have been clearer. Amos felt the weight of every gaze pressing down on him. There was nowhere to hide, no excuse that could mask the truth. He had ignored Mary, assuming she was just another unimportant guest. But now, standing face to face with Yike, his sharp gaze steady, his voice calm yet undeniably authoritative, Amos realized he had made a grave mistake. A senior manager from Yike's leadership team stepped forward, taking Amos's order pad and flipping through the pages. After a brief glance, he nodded solemnly. "There's no record for Table 12, he stated firmly. Mary was completely ignored. The other staff members remained still, watching the moment unfold with a mix of unease and apprehension. Some looked confused, others visibly nervous, knowing that what was happening now could forever change the atmosphere of the restaurant. Yike crossed his arms, his eyes fixed on Amos. "How long have you worked here?" Amos swallowed hard. "Almost a year, sir." "And after a year you still think you have the right to decide who deserves to be served and who can be ignored?" Yike's voice was low, but every word carried weight. Silence blanketed the restaurant. From behind the bar, Dana observed, giving a small nod, as if she had anticipated this moment all along. "You don't work here anymore." Yike said, his tone firm and unwavering. I won't allow anyone to bring that kind of attitude into this restaurant, especially not toward the guests who trust us to serve them. Amos opened his mouth as if to argue, but quickly closed it, realizing there was nothing left to say. He untied his apron, set it on the table, and walked out without another word. The door shut behind him, leaving behind a heavy silence. Everyone had seen it, and no one would forget. As the door closed behind Amos, an unusual silence settled over the restaurant. No one spoke, but everyone understood that they had just witnessed something significant. Some staff members stood tensely nearby, while a few diners exchanged thoughtful glances. What had just happened wasn't merely a termination. It was a lesson, a reminder that respect wasn't something to be selectively given, but something that every person deserved. Mary remained seated, as calm as she had been from the beginning. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or argue. Her patience had allowed the truth to reveal itself. And now, she simply offered a small smile as Yike approached, his eyes still sharp but his voice softened. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, gently taking her hand. Mary nodded. "I'm fine, son. You handled it well." Yike exhaled, as if releasing the last remnants of his lingering anger. He had just witnessed his own mother being disrespected in the very restaurant he had built, and nothing had enraged him more. But now, everything had been made clear. A young intern, who had quietly observed everything unfold, hesitantly stepped forward. "I'm sorry for what happened," he said softly, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I thought about saying something, but I didn't." Mary studied him for a moment before offering a gentle smile. "Realizing that is the first step. Next time, don't be afraid to speak up." The intern nodded, as if committing those words to memory. Yike glanced around the restaurant. Tonight's events would not soon be forgotten. And more importantly, they had left a mark, not just on how he would run this place, but on how everyone here would view fairness and respect moving forward. The ordeal was over, but its echoes still lingered throughout the restaurant. No one spoke loudly, yet the shift in atmosphere was undeniable. Those who had remained silent now whispered among themselves, exchanging glances filled with reflection. Some diners bowed their heads, realizing they had witnessed an injustice but failed to speak up. A few employees stood quietly, as if questioning how long they had unknowingly allowed this to happen. Yike didn't seek praise or admiration. He hadn't acted to be seen as a hero. He did it because it was the right thing to do. But he also understood that his real work had only just begun. His mother had been disrespected in the very restaurant he had built with his own hands. That meant something was broken within the system, and he couldn't allow it to continue. He turned to Dana, his manager, and spoke softly, yet loud enough for the staff to hear. "We need to change, not just because of what happened to my mother, but because no one should ever be treated this way." Dana nodded, her expression resolute. "I understand. We'll make sure this never happens again." Mary watched her son with a quiet smile. She had taught him patience, dignity, and the wisdom of choosing the right moment to act. Today, he had shown that he was not just a businessman. He was a true leader. As she placed her napkin down and stood, Yike immediately stepped forward, gently guiding her toward the door. But before leaving, she turned back to glance at the restaurant. Tonight, it had not only served fine food, but had also delivered a lesson in respect. Mary and Yike's story is a powerful reminder of the value of respect and fairness. It reveals that discrimination isn't always blatant. Sometimes it hides in subtle actions, in indifference, in quiet, calculated decisions. But no matter how it manifests, it is always wrong. Mary never needed to raise her voice or spark a confrontation. She simply held her dignity and let the truth unfold. Yike, as a leader, acted not just to defend his mother, but to ensure that his restaurant would be a place where every guest was treated with equal respect. This story also raises an important question. Do we have the courage to stand against injustice when we witness it? Too often, people remain silent, thinking it's not their problem, but that very silence enables wrongdoing to persist. The greatest lesson here is that courage doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it is as simple as speaking up when it matters. Respect is not a choice. It is a necessity in any society that strives for true fairness. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.